And we'll just give one more minute to start. Thank you all so much for coming today. Can you see my screen, Jamie? Can you hear us okay? I think that's the head nod. All right, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'd like to start with 1 minute of grounding. We're all coming from a busy day and different things we got going on. So I'd just like to honor the space and take about 1 minute grounding, and I'll go ahead and keep time. All right. Thank you guys. Okay, is my screen continuing? Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. Today's workshop is on compassionate communication. And this workshop explores the importance of compassionate communication through a deep dive into the different nuances of listening, active listening. This will be key lessons and examples to enhance your relationships and promote personal growth with ourselves and those that we love. And so today we're going to go over, like I said, new ways of listening from our experiences that we haven't considered before. So I've realized in my own experience, I've had several different jobs that when you put them together, there's so many different types of active listening. And so this is a lot of fun for me to kind of go through those, and we'll go through those in a minute. And I also want to hear from you all what you perceive compassionate communication to be, and any of your previous experiences with it. And ALISHA and I will go a little bit into our own experiences as well. So some 3 key points here. Communicating compassionately is to make more meaningful connections and maintain healthy boundaries. Also, it's important to balance our care for others with self-care and peace of mind, and listening in layers to create and gather all of our innate wisdom and experiences to hold space for ourselves and each other. So who are we? My name is David MORIN. I helped start Rise along with Carrie and ALISHA here, and I am a prison program manager. I teach 3 classes in prison. It's a business class, and it's an emotional intelligence class. I like to say it's like Brene Brown meets business, and that's the kind of class I teach with men in prison. And that requires a lot of trauma-informed listening, and being very alert to the responses and to the responses and reactions during the class. Now, I'm also a death doula, so I help people transition out of life at the end of life, and I am a poet. And so listening is a very critical piece in each of these different things that I do. Um, and I'll let ALISHA introduce herself and go over what Rise is.
Hi, everyone. My name is ALISHA VARGAS, and I am also a member of the board for RISE. Just a little bit about me. I work at a day program for special needs adults, and so I focus a lot on training staff in alternate ways of communicating and active listening and how to communicate with those who struggle to communicate. And also I am a mental health advocate, which is what drew me to the board for RISE. RISE is a nonprofit. We focus on self-empowerment and allowing everyone to gain the skills. Hopefully this workshop will be one of those where you can gain the skills to empower yourself and grow and just continue to rise up with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alicia. And for those of you who don't know, RISE is a nonprofit that was born out of our founders' experience in leading support groups for individuals thriving with cancer. We realized that these were such good self-care tips that everyone should take them. You know, we try to make self-care as like accessible as we can and quick and to the point. And so RISE was born out of wanting to take that mission to everyone else. Okay, so anyone would like to share, you can, or if you want to just throw something in the comments, but I would love to kind of get a gauge of our experience with active listening. And so I'd like for you to think of a time that you have felt the most seen, heard, and valued. And this could be any time. It could be yesterday. It could be 10 years ago. You know, just a time in your life that you have felt the most seen, heard, and valued. And I want you to think about what about the other person's language was it that helped to make you feel so witnessed, whether it was verbal cues or nonverbal cues. Just what about this person's behavior really showed that they cared so much about what you were saying? And if anything comes to mind, I'd love for you to throw it in the chat, or if you want to just unmute and blurt something out, whatever you're comfortable with. And in thinking about that, I would also like to think about to consider how you typically show up in conversations with others. You know, whether you're listening with something in your mind that you already think is right, or if you are intentionally trying to put away, you know, some of your biases while you're listening. And there's no like right or wrong answer. This is more just a self-assessment so that we can kind of have a baseline of how we typically show up for others. And the reason this is so important is because what I've realized in my work is that the way we show up for others is often indicative of the way we show up for ourselves in ways whether we know it or not, and vice versa. So anyways, thank you guys so much. Oh, we do have a couple chat. Holding your hand and crying together, absolutely. When your husband stops what he's doing to focus on what you're saying, try to listen by repeating back what they say and empathizing. That's so powerful. For me, it's eye contact. If I'm seeing eye contact, I just know that I'm being heard. Anyways, thank you both so much for your comment. Okay, and so from my experiences, I kind of synthesized everything that I've done over the last 10 to 15 years, and I'll be talking about those things, but I kind of boiled it down to these three critical factors. And this is also what I've learned in the Peace Corps from studying abroad and living in a whole new culture and country for 26 months. And these are the ABCs of listening they came up with. And so A is allow, B is believe, and C is clarify. So again, that's allow, believe, and clarify. And I'll go over those right now. And so when I say allow, this essentially means undivided attention and no distraction. And the reason that's important is because it signals to the other person that like what you have to share is very important to me. And I'm inviting you to share all that you need to share in the space that I'm creating. Which is number two, create space for others to share freely without fear of being judged. You know, if you know someone's going to judge you already before you say it, you are automatically going to self-edit yourself. And so this is very critical so that think of the times where you've shared something very personal. You knew how safe you would be most of the time. That's a very critical point. And then number 3 for allow is the importance of embracing pauses and not interrupting. Many, and myself included, growing up, I was very uncomfortable with silences. I would just think that a silence meant I needed to talk to end any awkward silences. But what I really found in my work is the more you're comfortable with silences, the more you're inviting someone else to share what they really want to say, because it gives them a time to kind of just sink in to that moment of what they're thinking. Anyways, B is for believe. And this is essentially asking you to just put aside everything that you think and know to be true and to sit in this person's perspective and believe everything that they say is true, everything about their human experience, And so this involves avoiding any judgment or defensiveness, setting aside preconceived notions and beliefs, and creating a safe space for personal truth. And I'm sure many of you, if you're on social media or just online, you can see that it can be very aggressive in people really being so adamant in their beliefs that not a lot of us are listening to each other. It's just mostly like, this is what I know to be right, and vice versa. And so this is really a way to help build a bridge between each other when we just automatically believe and validate someone else's experiences. And C is clarify. As we allow and as we choose to believe in what they're saying, clarifying along the way goes a long way to really deepen the conversation and the connection. And this is important to do with open-ended questions. Like, tell me more about that. Can you tell me more about that experience, or what does that mean for you? Things like that. It's very important to clarify to ensure that you are understanding what they're saying as well. The last thing you would want is for when someone's sharing something very personal for you to misunderstand something in the beginning of the conversation, and then you're just going different roads during the conversation. And so very important to clarify and ensure that you understand. And another option of doing this is just to give rephrasing statements or to ask follow-up questions. So I wanted to give a brief overview of what the ABCs are. And for me personally, these are the different experiences that have fueled this. I've done volunteering from a very earlier age with Muscular Dystrophy Association, which is how ALISHA and Carrie and I met. Like I said, I did Peace Corps, 2 years in the Peace Corps. I was in corporate sales for about 6 years. And so even through selling, I learned a lot about listening in the business environment. Poetry is definitely there too. That was more of a listening to your intuition. Death doula is, and I'll explain all of these in the next slides, and prison facilitation as well, like I said. And ALISHA will go over it, a little bit of her experience as well.
So much like David, I started volunteering very young. So volunteering was my first step into active listening. Sales, I actually learned quite a bit from doing retail work, more than I expected to learn. And I have a degree in public relations. So I definitely had to learn how to communicate in a variety of ways. Working in a day program with adults with disabilities, and my own mental health growth has given me a lot of insight into how to actively listen to others while also protecting my own mental health and setting boundaries. And then coaching my staff on how to communicate has made me look at the different ways that people communicate, and guiding other people in their communication skills has given me insight into my own communication skills. Oh, David, you're muted.
Thank you. So these next slides will be specific to each of these roles that we've had. And it'll be some information, but instead of thinking so much on all of the information I'm giving you, I would really like this to be an invitation to think of your own job experience at the same time and to think of all of the different lessons that these jobs could have in how to communicate with others. I'll be diving into the nuances a little bit, but that's mostly what I'm hoping to do here is to help you get started to think of how many different roles, even if they're smaller ones along the way, um, can you take from to improve the way we communicate with each other. All right, thank you. Okay, so when I was volunteering with MDA, these are some three key lessons that I learned, and I'm glad I learned them as young as I did in my teens. So you have to be very comfortable with asking direct questions, even though they might be awkward. And this could be like, "Hey, did you have a bowel movement today?" Like, you know. And so these were very awkward for me at an earlier age, but um, and even in when I was in Peace Corps, I'll get to that, but um, yeah, it's asking very direct questions. It was also here that I learned that our worth, our dignities and our worth are not tied to our bodies and our bodily function. That was really powerful for me to learn at that time. And also, how many of flavors of love there can be. How different circumstances demand different levels of resources and attention from different families. And this really opened up my perspective a lot to how many families must be going through things behind the scenes that we aren't even seeing. And so this is all about compassion, but this really helped deepen my compassion in a very powerful way. Um, in the Peace Corps, some of the major lessons I learned is that common sense isn't so common. We always like to lean on our common sense, like that's common sense. Why don't they know that? But what really common sense is just a culmination of our own personal experiences. And so when you go to a whole nother culture in Southeast Asia and East Timor, I realized that what's common sense for us is not so common elsewhere. And a really silly example is I a month after I arrived, I had a birthday there. And so, here in the States, it's BYOB all the time, BYOB. And so I did this with a few of my friends. We had BYOB and they came to my house and we thought it was fine. The next day we go to training and the community leader is like, "Hey, someone had a party yesterday and you offended the town very much because you did not have alcohol for everyone. And that it looked like you guys were just keeping the party to yourselves." And all of us were like, "It was BYOB. What's the big deal?" And it's like, "Oh, we're in another culture, homie. Like, that's not going to work." And so little things like that, I'm glad it was something minor. Um, but yeah, something else I learned there is because I didn't know the language, I had to really lean in on listening to the body language and context clues while learning their language. That was very important to me, to be able to navigate and live safely in a country. Um, and this is also where I learned that food choices were different than the US. And there were some definitely like tough to swallow moments um, that I learned culturally. They would eat animals that we would not necessarily want to eat in the States. And so just learning that, a whole other culture lives very differently with different values. Um, so those are some of the takeaways I had from Peace Corps. In sales, um, this is where I learned how thinking about what you will say next is not helpful to either party. And so being present in the conversation, making sure that you are listening to everything they are saying, as opposed to thinking of your next question in your head. Especially when my check depends on this, it's like this is going to be a commission check. Like the how serious I listen and how well I listen is only going to impact how well I get compensated. Um, and I realized this principle is the same, not necessarily with sales or commission check, but like I realized that the more I kept listening to people, the investment in that relationship was growing. And I got so much more from that too. Um, Here's where I learned the importance of open-ended questions. Remembering any minor details about people can go a very long way too. I'd ask how many kids they had or when their birthday was, and I'll just write them down. And then even a year later, when you remember, they're so surprised that you remember. And so I brought these tools with me to everyday relationships. Um, Maintaining relationships over long periods of time, always putting the customer first. Um, And the biggest thing I learned from sales is this idea of consultative selling, which is the opposite of what people think of when they think of like used car salesman approach or something like that. And consultative selling is really just a human-centered approach and finding out what is important to the person before ever bringing up your solution. And so this is just very important to get to know them before you want to help them. And I think that's something that's very big in our culture as well. A lot of people, before we even understand the problem, we're so quick to want to solve it. And I think a lot of that comes from a discomfort from sitting with uncertainty and things like that. And so I'm really grateful that sales of all industries taught me about that a little bit. Um, One of the more exciting ways I've learned about communicating and listening is through poetry. This was definitely helped me to improve the relationship with myself more than anything. Learning to listen to the different parts of me. You know, sometimes I would have knots in my body that wouldn't come free unless I edited a poem. And that was a very surreal experience for me, getting to know my body in that way. Um, but that's helped me with my relationships with other people as well. It's made my intuition much louder. I learned that when I hear other people share their poems, it can be very church-like if given enough respect, attention, and space. Just really hearing other people's truth in a very beautiful way. Um, and also learning that there's a whole nother entity through poetry itself, um, and distinguishing like the voice of this art as compared to whether it's my voice. And that's kind of getting in the weeds, but that's a lot of what poetry showed me. um, and also listening to the reactions and comments from others while sharing my poetry. And it doesn't necessarily have to be poetry, but just when you're speaking your truth to someone and really listening to the love you're getting back can be very profound for your relationship with yourself too. And having your own experience be validated. Yeah, thank you. And so next is with death doula. And so this is something I've been learning a lot in the last couple of years of helping guide people uh, through their end of life decisions and or end of life moments. And so if you're not familiar with what a death doula is, a death doula essentially just helps with all non-medical aspects around dying. And so it provides spiritual support, mental, emotional support, practical, logistical support, of helping just with details of whether it's your funeral or burial, any notes you want to leave behind with your family, that type of stuff, or untying any finished business. And so in work like this, I really learned how the present moment is really all that matters. And I know that's like very cliche, but present as far as noticing what you're feeling at any given time with whatever you're talking about, and really giving time and space and attention to your feelings and emotion in whatever present moment. Um, that's 99% of the job, to be honest. And yeah, and so, like I said, honoring every emotion, knowing that anything you're experiencing or going through can be a teacher of itself. Um, in this case, mortality is my teacher quite often. I find myself meditating on mortality a lot, and that's become a teacher in its own right because it's guided my decisions and behaviors in ways that otherwise wouldn't have. And that's what teachers do. um, what death doulas also teach, and a little bit of sales too, but to listen what is not being said, to listen in between the lines or to see if there's something else on their mind. I think we've all been in that position where uh, someone is saying one thing, but you can see what they're saying in between the line. And I've really learned that a lot more with this role here. And yeah, thank you so much. That's good for death doula. And we can hear from ALISHA now in some of her roles.
All right. So, like David, I volunteered with the MDA starting at a very young age. And I'm really blessed that I did that because it taught me a lot about communication. I did learn about being direct in my communication and focusing on and just honoring the people that I'm engaging with. I'm not doing them a favor by having a conversation with them. I'm not there to humor anyone. I'm there to be engaged and to enjoy them as people. Embracing humor, because humor is a great equalizer, and sometimes you have to have an awkward conversation, and a part of that can be leaning into that awkwardness and laughing about it, or that sadness, when you volunteer with individuals who are dealing with a degenerative disease. There's a lot of sadness, and you have to find the laughter within that. And that's the great equalizer, because a lot of the people I volunteered with would make jokes about things that in polite company you probably don't joke about, but it helped them cope. And I became a lot more comfortable in that space. And if I didn't joke with them, it would be doing a disservice, because they want to just be and, respond in as if they're like everyone else. They don't want to be treated with kid gloves. And that's something that I learned with. You can respect people by treating them like you would anybody else. And then, like I said, leaning into awkwardness when you need to. Not ignoring it, because sometimes ignoring it just makes it more awkward. And also recognizing those nonverbal cues. If someone's feeling uncomfortable, recognizing it and then approaching it either with compassion, with humor, whatever that individual needs in that moment. My sales experience and my work in public relations taught me quite a bit. And I learned a lot in retail, which I never expected to, but both of those experiences taught me about asking questions before offering solutions. And understanding what someone is needing or wanting, because I had to learn that sometimes that first question isn't the only question. My best example is when I was training in a retail position, and, we play acted somebody looking for an item. My gut reaction was to just pick one and give it to them. And I was told, well, you don't actually know what they're looking for. There's all these different features and all these different things that they could want. You didn't ask them any questions to follow up. So that first question, it's not always the only question. Somebody may need or want something, but there's layers to that. I learned to compartmentalize and to avoid taking negative reactions personally, because sometimes people are upset and it may be directed towards you, but that doesn't always mean it's about you. And I may not be able to control how anyone else reacts towards me, but I can control how I respond and how I take that energy and how I reflect it back. So I learned quickly how to compartmentalize and try and see what's underneath any frustration that they might have, instead of carrying that with me throughout the day. And then being willing to find answers when you don't have them, because it's okay to not have every answer, as long as you're willing to do the work to find the answer and put in that effort to make somebody feel seen and heard. Because it's really easy to just say, I don't know. But it's a whole different feeling for that person if you say, I don't know, but I will help you find out. So my day program work, I again work with adults with developmental disabilities. So I had to learn a variety of ways that people can communicate, and being creative in how to communicate with them, but also how to take their communication, because some of the individuals I work with can communicate perfectly fine verbally. Some of them use sign language. Some of them are only partially verbal. They might only use gestures or sounds. So having to learn how different people communicate and engage them in that way and recognizing when they're communicating. Also recognizing that everyone has struggle, everyone has a story, and a lot of times people with disabilities, there's a lot of stigma when they struggle. So it's really easy to see somebody struggling and having a hard day and thinking, oh, well, they're being rude, or thinking, well, they're arguing. But meanwhile, I probably had an outburst, because maybe I spilled my coffee and it was just not my morning. But in my eyes, my outburst was okay. And theirs was inappropriate. So just seeing that, um, seeing their stories and understanding and bridging that gap. And then allowing space for silence, because um, a lot of people, maybe they need more time to process, or maybe they don't understand, and I need to make sure they knew what I was talking about, and, rephrasing things if they didn't understand. Um, when they do respond, making sure I understand, because sometimes I think I understand completely what they're saying and communicating. And if I don't make sure, it could be, a huge breakdown in communication. And then with my own mental health journey and coaching my staff, those two things have been very interlinked, because as I've reflected on my own communication and my own blind spots and areas of growth, I've been able to teach those and guide my staff in those areas as well, because I can recognize, hey, this is really triggering to me, or hey, this is something I struggle with too, and this is something that I'm working on that might help you. But also understanding my own boundaries and teaching my staff to recognize their boundaries. Being honest and vulnerable is huge, because there's no room for judgment when you're coaching people and when you're trying to have open communication. So being really honest, if maybe I need help with something or I need help understanding, especially if you have to have an awkward conversation, I will lean into that awkwardness and I will tell them, look, I get that this is awkward. I don't really want to have this conversation either, but it needs to be had. And just being really honest about it, because we all know it's awkward, and pretending like it's not doesn't help anyone. Um, and and in that process, setting aside any judgment and engaging people with curiosity, because like David mentioned, you want to recognize that what they're saying and what they're feeling is true, because it's true for them. And two different things can be true. Like, we can see things completely different, and to us, it's true. And recognizing that, and instead of getting frustrated and, being aggressive in my approach, I have learned to approach with curiosity. Hey, this happened and it was a little frustrating, but help me understand. Where was your mind at? What happened here? How can we do it differently next time? Really understanding, because one thing I've learned is every single time my knee-jerk reaction was to be frustrated and, oh, I can't believe they're doing this again. We just finished talking about this. They're getting behind on their paperwork. Now we have to talk about it again. Every time I've had that knee-jerk reaction, when I calm myself and I approach them with curiosity, 9 times out of 10, there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. So engaging with curiosity, because as this slide shows, maintaining boundaries and expectations is possible and it's necessary, but I can do that without judgment. You know, I can let them know, hey, this is the expectation. You're not meeting that expectation. What's going on here? And how can I help you meet that expectation? Where's the breakdown? Where can we go from here? And I have to do that with myself too. Like if I'm struggling, if I'm not meeting expectations, where's that breakdown? So, as I'm growing in my mental health journey, I'm able to coach our staff in those areas. But as I'm coaching them, I'm also learning about my own blind spots and, oh, this came out of left field. Where did that reaction come from? So, it's been a very interlinked journey, and it's just constant growth in those areas.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alicia. And so I want to wrap this around. We gave many examples of many different lessons we've learned in our various roles. I hope you had done a little bit of reflecting on the different ways of listening that maybe some of your previous jobs have been there as a teacher for. And so again, these 3 ABCs of listening that I came up with were allow, believe, and clarify. And so I'd like to take some time for some reflection. Whether you'd want to share it in the comment or if you want to unmute, whatever you feel comfortable with. But I'd like us to take a couple of these questions and have a couple of minutes to just, to sit on this, to think about it, and share about it. And so the 2 questions here are, how do backgrounds and differences affect the way we listen and communicate with each other? How do backgrounds and differences affect the way we listen and communicate with each other? And the next question is, how can embracing vulnerability and authenticity deepen our connections with others and foster more trust and respect? And one more time, that was, how can embracing vulnerability and authenticity deepen our connections with others and foster more trust and respect? And in the spirit of sharing, I'll answer these questions from my own experience. But how do backgrounds and differences affect the way we listen and communicate with each other? I think I learned that the most through volunteering with Muscular Dystrophy Association and through Peace Corps as well. Just learning that my baseline level of existence and understanding of interpreting the world is completely different than what from people who grow up with debilitating diseases experience, or what a family in Southeast Asia experiences. I remember one day, it was very silly, but it was profound for me. But I had my little host brother at the house where I was living at in East Timor. He asked me one day, very seriously, playing with like rocks, like, "Hey, do they have rocks in America?" And I was like, "Of course they have rocks in America." But I was also realizing, well, how would he know? Well, he's probably only seen movies or just something that simple. And it was silly, but it was very loud for me. I'm like, wow, we live in different worlds without even realizing it. And for the second question of how can embracing vulnerability and authenticity deepen our connections with others and foster more trust and respect? Since I started writing poetry a few years ago, that was a tool for me to really lean in to being vulnerable and authentic with myself and others. Um, Sometimes too much. Like, I'm straight up an open book now. Sometimes it's to my harm, but for me, I'm so comfortable with it. And because of that, my relationships and friendships that I've made in the last few years have been among the most richest in my life. It's been so rewarding. And that really is born from vulnerability and authenticity. Even in the prisons, I'm an open book. Anytime I expect someone else to be vulnerable, I show up first. to kind of set the tone and help that invitation. And so, yeah, those are some ways I've learned. If anyone else has anything to share, I'd love to hear.
But in the interest of equality, I'll share. As far as the first question, probably the example that comes to mind first is when I first started supervising staff at my current job. And I was trying really hard to like build those bonds and improve morale. And I went to one of my staff and I like, hey, you did such a great job. I just want you to know. And I was like giving her this praise. And she very awkwardly looked at me and she told me, you don't have to do that. She was like, I know that was probably, you probably were trying really hard, but you don't have to do that. And I didn't realize until after the fact that just culturally, her particular culture, they're not open. They don't do open praise, and I made her super uncomfortable. But realizing that there's certain things that people just don't, culturally or due to their background may not feel comfortable sharing or communicating in a different way, like what's okay to communicate, what's not, and kind of working around that when you're building those relationships. Our relationship is great now, but I really had to, you know, communicate in the way she was comfortable. And for the second question, I was coaching a staff and he asked me, do you really think someone can be a leader if they admit that they don't know the answer when someone asks them a question? And I told him, you know, if my boss acts like he knows everything, I'm probably not going to feel comfortable admitting when I need help. And, I can fully be honest. Like, if I don't know the answer, we will learn the answer together. And I don't have to know everything to help you do your job. I don't have to know more than you. I have to give you the tools to do your job to the best of your ability, even if that means that I don't have all the answers. Um, and he really struggled with being vulnerable and admitting that he needed help. And, how do you be a leader if you need help? And um, I have found that letting people know, like, hey, I've had to have those same talks of, your work needs to improve or this needs to improve, and it hurts. And I went home and cried. And you know what? I'm still here. We're growing together. But it once I was very open and honest, a lot more people started coming to me asking for help.
Awesome. Thank you, Alicia. Um, and that's all we had for you guys. Oh, we have a chat from Carrie. We each have different communication styles, plus learned behaviors from school, parents, etc. Told we talk too much or too loud or too shy. And we think we know what others mean, but so often misunderstand each other's intentions and meanings. 100% relate to that. Thank you, Carrie. Um, if anyone has any questions, feel free to either put in the chat or unmute. Otherwise, that's all we had for you today. And
We have a
finish.
chat.
Oh, okay, Jamie, thank you. David, how do you listen between the lines? And how do you listen to what is not being expressed? What are the cues to watch for? And then a question for you as well, Alicia. How do you listen attentively to people of disabilities? So I'll answer that first. How do you listen to what is not being expressed? What are the cues to watch for? Um, that's a great question. I think for me, you can kind of see it in their eyes. There's like some hesitancy, or you can tell like maybe the words that they're saying, the words themselves are not matching the energy that's coming from, or that's not matching the expression coming from their eye. Um, For me, I tend to I think I noticed this subliminally. I think my subconscious handles a lot of this work, but if I had to put some thoughts to it, I would say I can kind of tell when someone is being hesitant. And so I think when you're used to when you practice being so present and just putting all of your attention on the other person instead of what you're thinking about or how what they're saying makes you feel, your body and your mind is taking in so much data about this person that you can kind of see what their baseline is, and you'll know when they're straying from it. And I watched in a movie once, I think that's like when there's someone robbing a bank or there's hostages or something, someone will come in to talk to them and they'll just talk about random crap for like 5 or 10 minutes that has nothing to do with the crime so that they can get a baseline on how they respond to different questions. Um, I don't know anything about that, but I think I got some similar stuff going on under the hood. I hope that answered your question. If not, feel free to ask another chat, but I'll let Alicia handle her question.
So I love this question. Listening attentively to people with disabilities. One of the biggest things that I have learned is to take the time, because so many individuals with disabilities, whether they process slower, whether it's a speech impediment, or whether they just, maybe they speak, but they're not very clear. Um, or if they use nonverbal communication or sign language, taking the time to figure out how they communicate and giving them the time to get out what they need to get out. Um, I, the example that comes to mind, one of the individuals I worked with, he would struggle to talk. He had a bit of a stutter. He would struggle to get the words out. He would have a bit of slurred speech. And I watched someone pretend they were listening, and he was trying to ask a question, and the person said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." And then, kind of waved him off. I knew, because I was listening, it wasn't a yes or no question. The person was saying, "Oh, yeah, yeah," and then walked off. It was not a yes or no question that they were asking. They just wanted to pretend like they were listening, but they didn't want to take the time. So they, people can tell. And if you are not willing to take the time, then, you're really showing them what their worth is to you. So really just giving them that undivided attention, taking the time. Hey, take your time. We're not in a rush. What is it you're trying to say? Sometimes the people I work with will say, "Oh, never mind," because they get tired of trying to get it out. Like, no, what is it that you wanted to say? Take your time. And that's a big part of it, just allowing that space.
And something else I'll mention on that that came to mind while Alicia you were talking is whether it's someone disabled, whether it's someone incarcerated, whatever their circumstance is, I think the most important and biggest thing you can do to make them feel listened and heard is to not talk to them about their circumstances. It's like, "Oh, I see you're in a wheelchair. What are you struggling with? Or how do you live life?" Like, don't talk to them about that. It's like, "Hey, what do you love? What are you excited about? What's your favorite movie?" Um, that's very simple, but it's so hard to be that simple for a majority of the population that when you do go to that level with them and just see them whole as a human, it goes a very long way. And in prison, it's the same. It's the same for me. I go in there. I don't ask any of them what their crime was or why they're in there. I just choose to see the human in them. And I ask every one of them what their name is. And I try to say their name as much as I can because they're in an environment that is designed to dehumanize. And so I know that's not the same for every group of people, but I think no matter how marginalized or why someone is marginalized, if you can speak to them outside of those circumstances, that's like 99% of the job because that initiation, when you're trying to talk to them that way, is going to open the door so much for them to bring their whole and authentic self to the table.
I really agree with that because I think the big umbrella for all of the ABCs that we went over is sincerity. A big part of active listening is to sincerely want to communicate with someone and sincerely want to be around them. A lot of the individuals I work with, if somebody genuinely enjoys being around them or genuinely wants to get to know them, they are going to build that bond so much easier and so much quicker than somebody who is just humoring them and, just nodding along and checking those boxes. So sincerity and, genuinely wanting to get to know someone as a person, even if it's for business reasons like in retail or, you know, um, professional reasons, like you have to have that professional conversation, but really talking to them and uh, communicating with them on an even field really can make a huge difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that question, Jamie. What a great question, or great question. Unless anyone has any other questions for us or comments, that would conclude our workshop today. Thank you so much for coming. Stay on the lookout. We will make this available on YouTube soon so that recording is available. Otherwise, thank you everyone so much for coming. Had such a great time with you.
Thank you, everyone.